Good morning, everyone. So far, we've talked about bodily injury liability insurance, property damage liability insurance, and those are the two types of insurance that are required by law in Washington State. All the other coverages you can get are considered optional coverages, although they can be very helpful in an accident. Remember those two liability insurance that I just listed? Those only help pay for other people's damages and injuries outside of your vehicle, and only when you're at fault. So it's a very limited coverage, but it helps people when you injure someone by driving badly or making a mistake. It helps recover them from their damages and their costs from the accident. Now, then we learned about insurance that could cover you. So those were collision insurance, which helps pay for your vehicle. Personal injury protection, or PIP coverage, which helps cover your injuries and the injuries of your passengers. And then we talked about, there was one other, I can't remember now. And now we're going to talk about, and those are the really common optional coverages to be considered. Like, there's no such thing as full coverage, but to be considered kind of full coverage would mean you'd have PIP and collision coverage as well is typically what's considered a full coverage. Now, how much it pays, those all things can vary. Today, we're going to talk about less common optional coverages that are less helpful, but they're also not that expensive. The first one's called comprehensive, and then there's a gap coverage, new car replacement, and umbrella insurance. Umbrella insurance is the only other one that I might recommend, but let's get to it. Okay. So comprehensive coverage. This provides coverage for everything that's not accident related. So things like floods, tornadoes, weather, hail, falling objects, theft, vandalism, somebody comes and paints your car, smashes your windshield, all those kind of things that aren't a collision or an accident or moving accident is covered by comprehensive insurance. The coverage limits, here you choose your coverage limits. Of course, the higher the coverage limit, the more expensive it is. You want enough coverage to cover, the kind of things that go wrong with a car. If you're in a place that floods a lot, a flood can completely ruin a car and have to have it totally replaced. So in that case, you'd want a very high coverage limit to match the value of your vehicle. Same with theft. Once you have a vehicle stolen, even if they do find it, it's oftentimes damaged. Hail and falling objects, those only cause typically visual damage, so you wouldn't need as much coverage for those kinds of things. When should you consider comp coverage? So if you live in a place with high theft or floods or falling objects, in the Pacific Northwest, occasionally cars will get crushed by trees. It might be useful to have. If you live in a city where there's a lot of theft, maybe it might be useful to have comprehensive coverage. I don't necessarily recommend it unless you have a really nice car that you want to keep pristine. If I got hail damage on one of my vehicles, I'm not sure I'd even have it repaired. Okay. Gap coverage. So gap coverage is a weird little coverage. So it's kind of complicated. Stay with me on it. So when you first buy a car, the moment you drive it, you register it in your name, basically, it becomes a used car and its value diminishes very quickly. In fact, in the first year, most new cars lose about 20% of their value. Now, during that early time of owning the car, you may have borrowed a lot of money to buy that car, and suddenly the car's value dips down below what you owe on the loan. So maybe you owe $28,000 on that car, and now it's like $26,000, it's only worth that, or $22,000. So if you were to crash the car, the insurance company would give you a payoff at most of $22,000, the value of the vehicle. And then but you would still have that $5,000 or $6,000 of loan left, and you would be responsible for paying that. Gap coverage is a type of coverage that would say, okay, if that happens to you and the payout from a collision is less than the amount you owe on the loan, gap coverage will kick in and cover that cost and pay that loan off for you. And it does not matter who's at fault for this. It would just kick in whenever the value of your car was less than the amount of the loan that you had on it. When should you consider gap coverage? So only in the first couple years of having an auto loan. So as soon as your loan is down below the value of your car, you don't need gap coverage anymore because there isn't that problem existing. Or even when you get close to it, probably still don't need gap coverage. So this is one of those ones where if you get gap coverage early when you buy a brand new car, you're going to want to watch the value of your car and your loan, and you're going to need to call up your insurance and say, hey, I want to cancel my gap coverage when that hits. All right, so that's gap coverage. I'm sure your insurance company will be happy to keep charging you for gap coverage even after your loan has changed, because they don't know that. They don't know when your situation has changed. All right, new car replacement coverage. Here's another weird little coverage. So let's say you buy a brand new car and you're worried that if you crash it, if you crash it, you're not going to get very much money back for it, or you're going to get less than what you maybe paid for it. So that when you go to buy a replacement car for that car, you're going to have to buy like a different, cheaper car because you won't get as much money back as you should have. Well, there's a coverage called new car replacement coverage within the first year of having a new car. Now, this is not a new car to you. It's a brand new car, first owner car. If you crash and your car gets totaled during that first year of ownership, the insurance will give you enough money to be able to buy that same brand new car. So really the car is only worth, say the car is normally you would buy it at $30,000. You've been driving it for 6 or 7 months. It's lost a ton of value during that time. So it's like maybe $25,000. You crash, it gets totaled. Normally your insurance company would just give you that $25,000. But new car replacement coverage would say, hey, you're in the first year of ownership. We're going to actually give you enough money to buy this exact same car, same make and same model, brand new. So whatever that difference is, they'll give you that. It's a strange thing to have, but if it's something you're worried about, it's interesting. And it doesn't matter who's at fault for this one. And the only time you should consider new car replacement coverage is in that first year of buying a new car. I wouldn't necessarily recommend spending the money on this. The chance of crashing and totaling a new car in the first year, it's just not that often that happens. For that, and but to be fair, this is a fairly inexpensive coverage because it is so rare to happen. And then at the end of that first year, make sure that the coverage ends. It should end because it's limited to the first year, but you want to just check your policy and make sure you're not still paying for it the second year, because it will literally say in the documents it only lasts for a year. That's the typical amount of time. All right, this last one is another one where I think might be really useful to you later in life. So umbrella insurance. What is this? So this is insurance that kicks in only after all your other insurance has been used up paying for an accident. So this is like kind of like a backup insurance. So if you get into a really bad accident, let's say you accidentally hit a bus and you cause a bus to crash and lots of people get injured, so suddenly you're being sued and there's this whole mess going on, your insurance is going to get used up really fast. Then your umbrella insurance will kick in. So you might have umbrella insurance that goes up to $500,000 or $1 million or whatever. That insurance would kick in and start covering costs for legal fees and settlements and all the things you still owe on the accident. And it covers here no matter who's at fault, although the chance of using umbrella insurance when someone else is at fault because you're not facing the majority of the bills would be pretty intense. So typically it's considered, it usually kicks in when you're at fault and you caused lots of damage or hurt somebody really badly. This can oftentimes kick in on things like motorcycle accidents. If you hit somebody on a motorcycle and it's deemed to be your fault, that person is going to get massive injuries, even in a fairly low speed accident, just because they're out in the middle of nowhere when they get hit. So be careful for motorcyclists. What are the coverage limits? So here you're going to choose your coverage. Again, the more coverage you get, the more expensive it will be. Although it's unusual to use umbrella insurance, so it's really not enormously expensive for the amount of coverage you get because it's so rare that you break into that. You probably will go through your whole life and not get into a massive, massive accident, but who knows? You might also get into 2 of them, so you just don't know. When should you consider umbrella insurance? So this becomes important when you have other assets you want to protect. So If you get into a really bad accident and you have a house and a car and a boat and all these other things that you've purchased and built up over time, you can be sued and forced to sell all that stuff to pay that settlement off. That's when umbrella insurance starts making a lot of sense. That would kick in and protect your other assets from having to be sold to pay off all those other debts. So it can be worth it in those cases. If you don't have those things, or when you're early in life, umbrella insurance doesn't make a ton of sense. All right. That's it, my friends. So I hope that was helpful. These are a little more niche, weird little insurances. There's a few other that we'll talk about later, like, ride share or commercial insurance, but those are much smaller. All right, have a good one, my friends, and we'll see you soon.